And we are recording this webinar so that way you can view it afterwards. It'll be sent out probably a day after our recording. So thanks so much for coming today, and feel free to share this webinar with any and all of your friends. So as we're going through, it looks like a lot of us have figured this out already, but just some information about how to use Zoom. There is a chat box feature, so if you have any questions during today's webinar, I encourage you to ask those questions here in the chat box. I'm going to be monitoring it during our session today, so feel free to put those in there and we'll get all of those questions answered as we go through. This is also our second webinar that the Kelly Kerr Services office is doing. And if you have any feedback on it, we will have a survey at the end of today's webinar for you to provide that for us so we can continue to offer these opportunities for you guys. All right. So my name is Lauren Little, and I am one of the Kelly Kerr coaches here for Kelly Indianapolis. You can see on the screen my contact information, so if you ever need to get a hold of me, especially since everyone's job search is going to be very specific and you might have really specific questions, you're welcome to message me about any of those here. But what we're going to be covering today are a couple of key points here. So first, we're going to be clarifying the question why you're moving out of state. We're also going to look at how you discover what the job market in the community looks like. In addition to that, we're going to talk about using LinkedIn as a networking tool. And then finally, we're going to cover a couple of topics, in particular on resumes and cover letters, the tiny adjustments that you'll make there. And then also you're going to be looking at just a couple of broad topics about interviews and job offers and how those have just a little bit different tinge to them when you go about the out-of-state job search. The reason that we're starting with clarifying why you want to move to a different location is because this is actually a top thought on all of our recruiters' minds, and it can actually be a really costly process for people to get a job, anywhere between $1,000 to $5,000 to bring on a new employee, and a company might even spend more than that because they are doing relocation expenses potentially. So hiring the wrong employee can mean we have loss of productivity and loss of time in the recruitment process. And also recruiters really do know their bottom lines very well. So the confidence in your plan to move is going to ensure confidence in the employer and also their interest in you as a candidate. So when we talk about clarifying why you want to move, there's a couple of things that I want you to use as part of what your personal brand and your message is going to be. So you're going to get asked this question during an interview, but really the reason we're talking about it in the beginning of the job search process is to get ahead of this and to be able to address it in our application, and also to be able to clarify it when we might be doing networking. So when you're talking about why you want to move out of state, we want to keep this as professional as possible. So what kinds of skills or experiences are you looking to expand upon that the company might be able to provide for you? And also, how does this move align with those professional goals? So kind of going back to the idea of what is maybe a 5-year or 2-year plan, how does that fit into here? Other things recruiters are really looking for too is if you've been to the location before, and that could be for business, you could have visited there on vacation. They want to know that you're familiar with what the location looks like. So when you're looking at this, if you haven't been to a city before, that's perfectly fine, even if you have an interest. But it's time to do some homework on what this area is going to look like for you and how you might fit in as a citizen there and also as a professional. So when we're talking about confidence, I want you to realize that the language you use when you speak with recruiters is going to help convince them that you're a more secure choice for an interview. So I get questions a lot about how do you come off as genuine, and really a well thought out answer about this this question is going to help with that. And anything less, maybe something that's less confident, can be classified as high risk. So let me give you an example of what I mean when I say high risk here. So for example, you might say something like, I'm considering moving out to San Francisco, but I'm not sure yet. For an employer, this is very high risk because you haven't really committed to the idea of even moving out there. And it's very short and sweet and to the point of really not being sure. When we look at a more in-depth answer, it might be something like, I'm really interested in moving out to the San Francisco area to build upon some of my professional career goals. And recently I took a trip out to California. I enjoyed the culture and I saw opportunities to grow my professional career at your company. And they align with my interests in marketing analytics. With this example, it's much more well thought out. It is broad, actually, when we're looking at it, but it gives enough of an interest to the employer that they see, oh, this person is really, really interested. A couple of other things to remember is just being very careful about generic statements. So for example, I want to move out to California because it's warm. Certainly, this can be a reason to move out to California, and it's a great one, but you do need to provide a lot more detail, just as we did in the example above, that really is going to provide that investment piece for an employer. So it might sound really silly, but when we are talking about moving to a new location, you really need to know what the job market looks like and also what the community is going to provide here. So before you start dedicating hours and hours to a job search, I want you to think about a couple of questions here. And the first one is, does the industry actually reside here? Are there companies that I have lots of options to choose from? Usually a lot more companies means you have a bigger chance of finding employment in your area. I've had students search in large cities and small cities, and one thing that can come up, especially is with the industry residing here, is they've found that it doesn't really. There's maybe one company or none in that area, so therefore we might nix that city off the list. I think it's really important too to think about the cost of living. So rent, food, transportation, your insurance costs potentially. Those can vary from location to location, and it's good to know what that looks like. And in addition to that, what is it that you need to make in order to maintain either your current lifestyle or the lifestyle that you envision for yourself? The other thing that's interesting too is it's kind of the Google effect. Is it easy or hard to find housing? Seattle actually didn't have a housing crisis until Google moved there. And so it's interesting to know that finding affordable housing is something else you should be considering as a factor in your move. Now, certainly I've listed off a lot of different things to be considering, and it's kind of begs the question, where do I find this information? So I encourage you to check out a couple of sites. I have 4 listed here. We'll look at a couple on the other slides here too. But the first one, to make sure that you identify who the organizations are, is local Chamber of Commerce websites. And local Chamber of Commerce websites provide directories of all of the businesses that reside within a certain region. It's also kind of a bonus because most Chamber of Commerce websites actually list them by industry. It's a very unique situation that you'll be able to not only locate everyone, but know who the competition is. The other website that we're going to look at is called citydata.com. So I talked about knowing what cost of living was going to look like, what kind of entertainment is in a certain area, and CityData provides that for you, so you can get a little bit more of a greater snapshot on what it looks like to live in this city. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys here, so that way we can actually look at some of these sites. The first one that I'm bringing up here on my screen is the Austin Chamber of Commerce website, so Austin, Texas. And you'll notice on here, there's a lot of information, but if you see where my cursor is at right now, you can find the directory. And when you click directory, this brings you to all of the members, and down here on the bottom you can actually pick categories to see the organizations that are located here in Austin. So if we decided to look, for example, in the finance and insurance area, we'll be able to see all of the companies that have locations here in the Austin area. Now, the thing to note about this is that this is not a job board, but it does get you to the companies so you can see where they're located and also how many locations they might have or who isn't there that you thought was there. The other website we were going to look at was City Data. So when we're looking at City Data, there's a ton of information on here. I'm not going to go through everything, but you can search for large and small cities. You can do it by state. If you see down here at the bottom, there's different states you can search for, but you can look for just about anything. So rent prices, you can look for the average income that people might be making in an area. You can look at restaurant lists. You can also look at crime data. There's quite a bit in here. And the more knowledgeable you are about a place, it will increase your confidence and also show that you've done the research and know where you're moving to. I think one of the coolest parts about this site too is as you start to look at different cities, especially those of you who might be planning on starting a family soon, you can search for K through 12 schools on here. You can even see how a certain city or region voted in the last presidential election. It's pretty cool what you can dig out of this website, and you don't have to search a lot of places either to find it. So there's quite a bit of an advantage to researching that information. Alrighty, so the other two things that I wanted to show you real quick here while we're sharing screens is we're looking at the website for IU's Money Smarts program. And I show you this because it's a free resource for all IU students. And it helps you if you've never actually built a budget before, or you're looking to see, to watch podcasts, for example, on how to set up finances. You can even schedule an appointment with these experts in the finance area. It's personal finance. And they will be able to go over costs with you as they might apply to the lifestyle that you're looking to live. So if you go to this area here, you can actually look at take a course, and you can enroll in different Money Smart webinars that you can take. There's also ones that you can take that are embedded in Canvas. So I encourage you to look at that because having some of that knowledge is always smart to use. And the last resource before we get back to our PowerPoint here is salary.com. I had mentioned to you that it's a really good idea to know what kind of salary that you'll need in order to live in a certain location. I think it's very interesting to know that you could be making $50,000 here in Indianapolis, or you could move out to Seattle and you could be making $85,000, but cost of living actually might make those salaries pretty equivalent. This is really interesting because you can look at it by location. The reason I also like salary.com is because this is reported by employers, and they will tell you what they are paying their employees. So it's not self-reported by an employee. It's really a great site to use if you're looking to garner that information about your salary and what you might be expecting there. Alrighty, so before we move on here, and let me get us to the right slide. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to talking talking about networking and where we're going to be searching. Okay. All right, guys. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is clarifying where we want to be searching. So when we look at where we're searching, there's kind of a combination of three areas we're going to check out. The first one is company websites, and company websites provide us the career section where we can actually go online and apply. The reason I bring this one up first is because companies are posting on their websites for free. They don't have to pay a fee that they would if they posted on Indeed or Monster or LinkedIn or any of those sites. And it's the first place that they'll think to go and post. The second one we're going to be talking about a little bit later is utilizing your network and using the people in our lives that either we know or don't know at this point in order to build our options for looking out of state. And next, the two at the bottom we're going to look at are job boards that are specific to your industry and also regional job boards. So if you're in the chat box right now, I'm going to share a file with everybody, and I will pull it up here in just a second here. And this is actually a document that has a small list. I won't call it a comprehensive list, but it certainly will provide you with a lot of good starting points for industry-specific job boards. There's absolutely nothing wrong with looking at opportunities on Indeed or Monster or LinkedIn, but oftentimes when we do searches there, we're getting a lot of job postings that maybe aren't relevant to us. And when we look at a job posting, for example, on the American Marketing Association job board, we're actually getting a targeted position that is looking for marketing professionals with a professional association that is just for marketers. That's a really great place to search. And when we're looking for, or when recruiters actually look to post their jobs, they start with professional associations before they go any other place to post their jobs. So this is a kind of an insider trader's secret that will help you be much more powerful in your job search. It's also worth noting, for example, if you're on the American Marketing Association website, you will notice that they have regional job boards, and you can go to the Indy AMA, the American Marketing Association. They will have job postings that are specific to Indianapolis, and you can see that for Atlanta and LA and New York and just about any region that you might consider. There will be a regional job board in there. This is meant to be a starting point. You'll notice that we're going to look at another slide here. I've got all of these positions kind of listed in, I call it the three-ring circus. They all really overlap with each other, and one can't live without the other. So, for example, if you spend all of your time looking on job boards, you're missing out what's happening on the company websites if the company decided not to post on a job board. The same thing can happen if you spend all of your time networking but decide to ignore the company websites. So you have to use all of these in tandem with each other so you see the most opportunities, because there isn't, unfortunately, one good place to search for opportunities or any jobs or internships. There's going to have to be a combination of all three of these in order to see the most. Before we decide to move forward, the one area I did want to talk about with company websites, when we were doing our research on the regions area, I had mentioned you could go to the Chamber of Commerce websites. That's how I recommend getting a hold of these company websites. You'll be able to find everybody who's in that area, and you can find them super easy. And it's also better than a Google search. So if you've ever looked for finance companies on Google, you probably got millions and millions of hits, and you're not going to sort through all of that. So the company websites area is going to be very helpful. All righty, guys. So I'm just checking our chat box here. It looks like everybody is doing pretty good. I don't have any questions. I am going to segue now into networking. Unless people have other questions, I'll wait here just a minute while people type, if you think of anything. All righty. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on here since we don't have any questions. So networking is actually one of the biggest parts of the job search, and especially because you're looking out of state, you kind of need to up this game a little bit because you don't have the advantage of being in a local area or knowing the local people as well as you might in your hometown or where you're residing at the moment. So there's a couple of ways that I want you to get involved in this the job search and networking through LinkedIn. It's one of the easiest ways to start your networking journey here. So what I want you to do first of all is update your profile, and that includes updating your headline to show recruiters that you're actively in the job search. So for example, you might use something along the lines of recent graduates seeking full-time supply chain positions in Atlanta. That's really specific. It tells them the industry and it tells them the location. And because you're a recent graduate, they know that you are ready to start immediately. So it kind of hits three really big points. You'll also want to make sure that you're actually utilizing LinkedIn. It's one thing to have a profile, but it's another thing to actually use it and engage with people. And when I talk about engaging, I'm talking about posting things. So for example, posting an industry update, or there was something in the news about a company you were really interested in. I also encourage you to engage with your peers and your colleagues. So you might like their posts or you might comment on their news feeds. There's algorithms that LinkedIn uses, as most social media does nowadays. And the more that you like and you comment, the more that you appear in not only your connections news feeds, but also their connections news feeds. So you kind of start to hit multiple people that maybe you don't know. It's also worth noting that the industry groups are very important nowadays because they're starting to appear in your news feeds with their conversations. And there's a lot of industry groups that are region specific. So I would encourage you to look at region specific ones, especially if you're looking to move out someplace that you've never been before. You need to know who's there and what's happening in those areas. As always, to follow the companies of interest. That's probably one of the first things that you do when you set up a LinkedIn profile. But as you start to apply or you find companies you want to be involved with, you want to follow those. And I'm going to show you guys something here really quick because it's a pretty neat feature on LinkedIn. So I've got our LinkedIn page pulled up here. And if you look up here in the search bar, you can search for any school. So for example, if you attended Indiana University, we'll look we'll look at IUPUI. I think that'll be the easiest way to pull it up. We can pull up IUPUI's school page. So we're gonna click that. And we can actually see a list on the left side of the page to see all of the alumni, so people who have identified themselves as attending the school. And we can see there's over 88,000 alumni here, and we can use these people to network. So let's just say we're looking in Chicago, so I might select this down here. And I might say that I'm also interested in finding marketing professionals. So from that 88,000, now we have 582 alumni that we're looking at. That's a big list still, but it is much smaller than 88,000 and also not having any place to start. So when we scroll down here to the bottom, you're going to see all of the people pop up that might have marketing somewhere mentioned in their profile. So like, for example, if we looked at Ashley, when we click on here, what we can do is read through what she is all about, who she is connected with, what her professional experience looks like. And it looks like our office is connected with her, but if she wasn't connected with us, we could actually send her a personalized connection invite in order to network with her. You can also do this for companies. So for example, if we were going to look at BKD, which for those of you who don't know, it's a CPA accounting firm, you can actually go to their website here on LinkedIn, their profile page, and you can see all of the employees that are connected on LinkedIn. So we can also find people that way. What's kind of interesting is if you do end up connecting with our office on LinkedIn, you'll be able to notice who are the connections of the Kelly Career Services office that work here. So we actually have 10 people that we know at BKD that are connected with us in some way, shape, or form. And that can also be a personal connection you can use. So it looks like we had a question in here. You're not able to see the alumni list. So it depends upon what you have listed on your LinkedIn profile. So if you don't have Indiana University or IUPUI listed on there, you won't be able to see the alumni feature. So that does create some limitations on there, but certainly we can always look at that later to see if how to add that on your profile, but it's in the education section. All righty. Let's go ahead and get back into our PowerPoint here to talk a little bit about what we call the hidden job market. And the reason we're spending so much time on LinkedIn and on networking is that's how you differentiate yourself, whether or not it's a local job search or an out of state. But companies, again, don't always post on these job boards like Indeed or LinkedIn because it is expensive for them to do that. And they will not always post on their website either. Some hiring managers or organizations actually will rely completely on referrals. So you may not even see these postings. So by tapping into your network, whether it's the alumni or you're just reaching out cold to someone at an organization, you'll be able to network with these professionals in the field and find out about the opportunities that much faster. I always like to say that when you're connecting with people, it is a human connection because people hire people. They don't hire resumes or cover letters. They really want you to be engrossed in this process here of finding a job. And so networking really has to get utilized to a higher degree. That being said, it kind of comes down to, it's the Pinocchio effect. You kind of become the real person when you connect with these people and you share your goals and your dreams and whatever that looks like in these connections. So it's worth noting when I talk about networking, what am I supposed to say when I talk to these people? The informational interview is your best bet, and basically an informational interview is you learning about the company, the person at this organization, the culture of the organization. You can even ask them questions about the city and their job. But one thing you never want to ask this person when you reach out to them is you're not asking for a job. You're really just gaining information. You can't ask directly for a job, especially if you haven't met this person, because you haven't established a relationship yet, and you can't make those kind of asks that you could for someone that you might have known for a while. So I give the example of your uncle who told you that you could contact him anytime you wanted. Well, that's a very different situation because you've known your uncle for a while. But for a person that hasn't, you have a problem there. So you have to be very careful. When you also connect with these individuals, you have to maintain these relationships. So you connect with them once, and you might follow up with them every maybe couple months, just depending upon how your search is going. And you always want to send thank yous at the end of these conversations too, because they are taking their time out of the day in order to speak with you, whether that's for 15 minutes or for an hour. I always love informational interviews that are over the phone or on Skype. Those are going to be the best connections, especially since we're out of state. We may not be able to travel. If you do find yourself, though, in the location of where you're looking to move to, I know a lot of people are going on spring break here and might be visiting the cities that they want to go spend time in and work in. That's a great time to take it a couple hours off and actually do face-to-face informational interviews. So there's a little bit of work on the front end to make sure that you have all of those times and coffee dates set up, but it can be worthwhile if you have the opportunity and you're already going to be there anyway. All right, so before we move on, we are going to talk about resumes and cover letters next. Does anyone have questions about networking, conducting those informational interviews, or even finding alumni or people to talk to?
I actually have a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so after you find a person or an alumni and you get in touch with them for the first time, how do you, I know you touched on maintaining the the network, but if you can't keep asking the same thing.
Yes, you're completely
So what do
right.
you
You
do?
want to keep things fresh.
Right. So what do you do? Like what kind of things
Well,
do
it
you
can
do?
always vary on what you talk with them about. Whenever I update my network, I'm not telling them the same thing every time. So, for example, I might update them on what my job search looks like one time. Another time, I might send them a really interesting article that has to do in our industry. So, for example, if there's been a big shift in the way people, we work with clients, I might want to send that to them and get their feedback on it. I may even ask them as I build the relationship for bigger requests. So, a big request, for example, might look like having them review my resume and giving feedback. I may ask them if they have other people that I could potentially reach out to in their network who would be willing to talk with me. So, you can get really creative with the types of requests that you're asking, and it varies up how you maintain the relationship. That's a really good question.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions? So someone in the chat box says, what is a good example to start a networking conversation over LinkedIn? I always try and find commonalities. So when I'm looking, for example, and finding this person because they've attended IUPUI, that's how I might actually start up a conversation. And when I send them a message, I might say, hey, I noticed we both attended IUPUI. I would love to connect with you and learn more about your role at this company. Would you have 20 minutes to talk with me? Something very short that doesn't create a whole lot of requests in one message will help you start that networking conversation that will lead to more fruitful conversations over, again, Skype or over the phone. That's a really good question. All righty. Well, I'm gonna move on. If you have another question, certainly continue typing it. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about resumes and cover letters in the out-of-state job search. The best part about resumes is that very little changes in this document. So we're talking a lot of big shifts in how you might be searching for things, but this is one thing that stays the same for the most part. So what does stay the same? You need to personalize this document, and this is always towards the job and the company. You're basically asking yourself the question, what are the company's needs and how are you fulfilling them? And we do that when we look at a job description and we look at the keywords that they might be posting in there, and we might tweak our resume just slightly to reflect those terms. You also might utilize your insider knowledge now that you've conducted some informational interviews and you've networked with people. You might have learned what they look for in certain candidates, and you might tweak your resume just slightly to reflect those different skills, or to better highlight your knowledge of software programs. So you'll utilize that into the resume as well. Now, everyone's resume certainly is going to look different, and then it adds another layer when you decide to apply to a particular job and company. So certainly for these documents, as you're starting to customize them, I'm always happy to look at them. We also have other Kelly coaches here that would be willing to check out what you're applying to. When you come for an appointment or you send a resume to either of the coaches, just make sure you include the job that you're looking for, so that way we can look to see where you're matching and where you could potentially be boosting that information. With that being said, what's different, and this is a question I get quite a bit, is I don't want my address on my resume. Well, guess what? You don't have to include it. You're welcome to remove your address, but I always say replace it with your LinkedIn URL. One thing that I'm going to put in the chat box here real quick is actually a link to customize your LinkedIn URL. This is probably one of the coolest things you can do, because it's a free LinkedIn service that they offer, and you'll be able to customize that, and it's easy to share for people, and that will replace your address. Now, you won't be able to replace your address completely, because usually in the application process, you're going to be required to put your permanent address, but it won't be listed on your main resume. The other thing that's going to be a little different that you may decide to list on here is listing something in replacement of the address that says relocating to Denver in May 2019. So you'll actually list your intention to move to the city directly on the resume that might replace your address. Now, you can use this in a couple of ways. You might not be willing to move or have the intention of moving without a job, but this does demonstrate the willingness to relocate. The other thing that comes back to this as well is it solidifies to an employer that you're serious about the move. So I want you to think back to the question of why are you moving out of state? That really comes into play here in this document. Now, the other thing that I usually get questions about is, well, what if I have family members, or maybe I want to list a fake address on my resume? I really caution you to avoid this tactic, because fake addresses, or even using a family member's address, can have consequences on your resume. So just for an example, try explaining to an employer that you can't come tomorrow for a 30-minute interview because you're in Indianapolis and they're out in California. It's not really a good idea, because it's a betrayal of trust, really, because you've listed on there. That being said, for a family member's address, you can always list, will be locating out here in May 2019, and this will have you'll have the address listed directly after it. So you can certainly use it. I just caution you to be very careful about that, because that could be sending mixed messages to an employer.
I have a quick question again.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the second bullet, the listing the relocating to blah 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 city.
Mm-hmm.
So what if, and even though if you're actually not moving to that city and you're just looking for jobs there, you said it would help. But what if they ask what's the reason for moving? How do
And
you
that
answer that?
Yeah, so that's where you need to go back to that first question that we asked at the beginning is why are you looking to move out to that location? And you might have different reasons for moving to
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh versus moving to Los Angeles. And when you get that question in an interview, that's where you might address it. And a lot of times when you're addressing that question, it comes down to the opportunity that is available at the company and also how that
Gotcha.
opportunity aligns with the professional goals. Does
Perfect.
that
Thank
help
you.
with your question?
Yeah, it does.
Excellent.
Yep, yep.
So we have another question here in the chat box. Can we give a reason for a particular city to choose because of family and relatives? Yes, you can certainly use that, but you need to pair it with a professional goal as well. So you have to lead with the professional goal and then say, yeah, and in addition, I also have family members that live there. So it has to be a marriage between the two. You can't just be saying it's because of one or the other. In that case, especially with family and relatives, it really helps bring the professional goals to the forefront. That's a good question. All right. Does anyone have any more questions on resumes? All righty. If you have more questions, of course, continue to put those in the chat box. We're going to move on to cover letters here. And again, the bonus with cover letters is very little changes. What's going to stay the same on your cover letter is the fact that it gets personalized. So we have brought this up multiple times on the resume. It's the same for this document. A recruiter is going to be able to spot a generic cover letter a mile away. So I want you to realize that the customization is key. And again, that comes from reading the job description, matching your skills with the experience and experiences with the organization's needs too as well. Now, of course, this document will look different for everybody. So if you need help with the personalization piece and you're applying to a particular position, I'm happy to look over those. Our other Kelly coaches are also welcome to do that when we're looking at those documents. Now, here's a couple of places, though, where you might do some personalization and what will change for out-of-state job seekers. First of all, in your opening paragraph, you're going to address a couple of key things anyway. Why are you interested in the company? Why are you interested in the position? But you're also going to talk about your willingness to relocate or when you might be relocating. Some of us actually might have a very specific timeline because regardless of whether or not we have a job, we're going to move out there anyway. So it depends upon what your situation looks like. You also might be addressing, again, that reason for wanting to relocate, which is going to basically come down to the position in the company, because it does need to have a professional component to it. We don't really need to talk about friends or family in a cover letter since this is a professional document, but certainly you can bring it up in an interview, for example. Now, one of my favorite bonus pieces about the cover letter comes with your networking that you might have done. And in an opening paragraph, you might mention the names of people you've networked with. Now, a couple of pieces of advice when you do this. First of all, get permission from the person that you are networking with to mention their name in the cover letter, especially if you know the conversation has gone well and they are very interested in you. They could have a lot of pull in that recruiter's interest in you. It also shows that you've done research and that you have a very personal interest on moving to this particular location and to the organization there as well. This has backfired on people, especially when they didn't know that either the person was job searching or that they were going to be mentioned in a cover letter. So I really stress to you, let the person know. The individual also might give you some insider knowledge on other people to connect with and also mention in the cover letter. But in addition to that, they could give you other ways to do referrals. So a lot of companies will have that in their documents where you will mention a person's name throughout the application, and they may give you advice to put it there as well. So again, not a lot of changes. Do we have any questions on cover letters for the out-of-state search before we move on? All righty. So if you have a question, as usual, continue to type it. We're going to briefly talk about interviewing, briefly talk about salary negotiation. But for interviewing, one thing that's not going to change for you is first round interviews are going to probably be virtual or over the phone. And first round interviews are sometimes called screening interviews, so they may not be any longer than 20 to 30 minutes. But even for local interviews, this is pretty common that these are done virtually or over the phone anymore, so that won't change. But your second and sometimes for us, a third round interview could be in person, so this is where you need to prepare to travel. If you're invited to do that in-person interview, that is just an added stress, but it's worth noting that when you're interacting with the office staff to schedule the interview, to get your travel scheduled, whether that's via plane or your hotel, always be very, very kind to these individuals. You're likely going to be working with an administrative assistant. And I will tell you more often than not, those people get asked about how they were treated during that process, whether that was email interactions or over the phone. They'll seek their advice, the hiring manager will. So you want to make sure that you've always made a good impression. If you're currently working and you need to coordinate this time off with your employer, you can just tell them you need to take a day, and you'll coordinate that with your HR office as well, but you don't have to disclose why you're out for the day. That's something that you can, keep to yourself. In addition to that, it's worth noting if you're still a student and you're interviewing, that's also, it's actually the flip side of what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to tell your professor that you're going out to do this interview, so that way they can help make sure that you get caught up on material that might be happening that day. But the more open you are to your faculty members, the better when you're going about that. And we've got a question in the chat box here. So what do you say when companies want to do an in-person interview as the first? You're welcome to still do a first round interview in person. It's not uncommon that that still happens, but again, you'll need to coordinate the travel with them. So that is something to be aware of. Most companies, I will tell you, have a budget set aside for interviewing, so they will likely be able to help with some of the costs, maybe not all of them, but a lot of it. And some organizations may not. We usually see smaller companies who might not be able to support a lot of the travel component, but certainly you can ask that. The follow-up question, how do you ask them to pay for it? You can ask them how reimbursement might work. And if they say they don't reimburse, then you'll know that you will be paying for those travel expenses, but they will usually disclose that at the beginning when they're starting the interview scheduling process, especially if they see you're out of state and they're asking for in-person. That's very common with HR professionals, that they're going to help coordinate that. Very good question. All righty. And other question here, what if it's not possible for you to go in person? This is another conversation that will be very situational. So you'll have to ask the HR manager what other opportunities might be available for you to conduct the same interview that would be happening in person virtually. So it'll likely not be a phone interview. They're probably going to ask you to do a Skype or some kind of virtual interview, maybe using a software like this. And the reason for it is if they're going to interview all of those candidates, if they have a set, like let's say 5 candidates, they want everything to be as similar as possible. And that includes the situation, the questions that you might be asked, the environment. And so that's why they're going to ask that, but they're going to try and make it as comparable as possible. That is a very good question. Others on interviewing? Alrighty. So we're going to briefly touch on accepting job offers. The reason it's brief is because this will change for every single person depending on a situation, depending on a company. So it kind of becomes very complicated quickly to give very specific advice. However, from your research in the beginning, when we talked about knowing the cost of living, knowing a potential salary, when we looked at those two, city data and salary.com, you have to know what you're willing to accept and where you're going to need to negotiate. So relocation expenses are possible. A lot of companies have that as an added benefit, but their compensation might look different from company A to company B. So I have seen organizations offer a $2,000 stipend that you had to kind of budget all of your travel expenses in between that. And I've seen companies say, just submit your receipts and we'll get you reimbursed once you come back. I've even seen other organizations just take on everything. So Enterprise is a really good example, who will basically pick up all of your stuff. They'll schedule the move. They'll get the movers into your house. And it's very different from other companies who don't do that, for example. So note that you can negotiate those. Relocation expenses can be a lot of money. So think about that, because if you look at what it takes to rent a truck across from Indianapolis to California, I will tell you, you're looking at a couple thousand, if not a little bit more. So think about that coming out of your paycheck and where you might be able to negotiate that. That being said, I am happy to help with salary negotiation because, again, it's very subjective. But in addition, if you can't come in for an appointment, there is a free resource through the AAUW, which is the American Association of University Women. And if you go to salary.aauw.org, you can attend a free salary negotiation course. It is not just for women, men you can attend to as well. It's aimed at women, certainly because we see lower rates of women negotiating. So that's why you see it targeted that way. But all of the information in this course, and it is phenomenal, is very helpful, and you'll be able to access that for free. I look at job offers too quite often, so I can also give you feedback on that, but it is very important for you to have that research ahead of time about the salary expectations and what you're willing to accept and what you would need to negotiate. Alrighty. So we're nearing the end. I do want to leave some time for questions. One thing that I'm actually going to send you here to everyone is a file. Give me just a second to upload it. This is our out-of-state job searching checklist, because we have certainly covered quite a bit of information. And this job searching checklist has almost all of the resources, I think everything I've embedded in there. And also kind of just a checklist of what you might need to be doing in each step of this process. The thing to remember about job searching, guys, is that it doesn't really change drastically when you look local versus out of state, but there are tiny tweaks that you can do to make sure that you stand out as a candidate. And I think the big one, when we spent the most time on talking, which was networking, is what's going to make the difference for you as an out-of-state job seeker. That being said, if you need any personalized help, I am going to put my contact information here in the chat box so that way you can reach out to me at any time. That is always an option, and you can contact me via email. You can call and set up an appointment. It's worth noting that we have drop-ins available, and guess what? That is every Wednesday and Thursday from 1 to 4:30 here in BS 2010. That information is in there as well. And then finally, again, this is our second webinar we've done, and I would love to get some feedback from you. We are going to continue to offer these opportunities, and we would like to know what you think went well and what you would like to see different. And even if there are other topics you'd like us to cover, we will certainly look at those as well. So all of that being said, there is a link. Although, let's see if that one went in here. There we go. The link is now live and active in the chat box. That would be very helpful. We do appreciate all of your time there. With that being said, I will open the floor to questions. I realize we're just at time now, but I will stay over for a couple minutes as people have additional questions, and we can chit chat from there. Yeah, so someone wanted to see a little bit more information on how you find the alumni on LinkedIn. So when you are on LinkedIn, I'm just going to go back to our homepage here. This is what it'll look like when you log in. And what you're going to need to look for is your school. So I just type in IUPUI, and you're going to get several different options. The first one that pops up is Indiana University, Purdue University, and it says school after, and that's the one you want to click. Now, when you get to this home page here, you're going to see a lot of different things. You could go to the school's website. You'll be able to see all of the employees that work here. But what's most helpful is on the left side of the screen, the alumni feature, and that's where you'll click that. And here you can see it actually saved what we looked for. So you can see in the Chicago area for marketing, for example. But you can look for anything. You can search for any city. You can search for any keyword. And like I said, there's 88,000 alumni. So it certainly has a lot of power for you to search for people who are doing the work that you want to do or working at the companies you want to work at.